So everyone, welcome to our conversation session. It's about disrupting mobility. I'm Sixuan from CCTV Business Channel. To me, disrupting mobility is about the future of sustainable transportation, which is reshaping our view on public space and resources. Uber, the car-sharing company, is very much synonymous with the notion of sharing economy, and which has become such a household word even here in China. So today we're going to be having a conversation with the man behind Uber. He speaks highly of China's embracing of Internet Plus, and he actually predicts that Beijing is going to be the next innovation hub globally. He's an entrepreneur, he is a problem solver, and he is also a visionary business leader. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Travis Kalanick, Uber CEO and co-founder. Great to see you again.
You stole my good lines. There's nothing left to say.
Yeah, this is actually the third conversation I have with you this year so far. Just for your information, I think TK spent about 70 days, correct me if I'm wrong, in China last year. And this year, I'm not sure, maybe you come to China every 2 months?
Yeah, so this is my third time to China this year. Usually I spend 10 days. So
what makes you come to China this often?
Well, we have a pretty large business here. so we're doing more trips in China than we're doing in any country in the world, including the US. So we need to spend time here and make sure that we're sort of in the mindset. I like to say we need to become Chinese. Now look, the people who run the cities and run the operations here in the country, they're the sons and daughters of China. But in order to properly connect it to all the technology and product and other efforts that are going on in San Francisco, it's important that I spend time here.
So here's a tough one. What's your favorite city in China?
Oh, that's a couple times ago after Boao, I went to Sanya, which was that was a nice little breather after Boao. So. Look, my favorite city right now is probably, no matter what I say, my team's going to get really mad at me. But I'd say, let's have top two. So I obviously spent a lot of time in Beijing. The first time I was in Beijing was in 2006. So to have seen how much Beijing has changed, how it's really become sort of a cosmopolitan world city has been really phenomenal to watch from the outside. But I've got a soft spot for Chengdu. So I've just enjoyed my time that I've spent there.
Great to know that. That's my hometown.
Well, and there's very good hot pots, so we're good.
Hope your Chinese or even Sichuanese is getting better.
I've got a long way to go. So please don't make me stand up against Mark Zuckerberg with any Chinese.
That's a challenging one. Yeah. So what was your key takeaway from the premier speech this morning at the opening ceremony?
Well, look, I think the overall is that at least from my perspective is the premier is very confident about the Chinese economy, and he's confident about its prospects. And if given last year, and we saw we saw briefly the stock market sort of come down pretty quickly for a little bit. A lot of people had a lot of things to say about questioning whether the economy was going to do well, and it just never resonated for me. It never resonated for our China team because we are seeing such frenetic economic activity on the ground. Is that in cities we've seen the Chinese government and of course, we're on the business side. We've just seen them embrace our kind of innovation, and we've grown pretty massively in a very short period of time. And so I think I kind of have that same feeling of confidence in the core of the economy. Now, we don't have the macro view. We are in cities. We are on the ground, but we are literally adding hundreds of thousands of drivers to the system, every month. And so we feel very confident that the economy continues to do well, and we like what we see.
How many cities we're in China, and then what's the sort of expansion plan this year?
So we are in 60 cities right now, 60. We plan on getting to 100 before the end of the year.
100?
Yes.
Before the end of the year?
Yes. I know you're going to quote me on this, so I did my math beforehand.
Okay, I'm going to write it down. And so what are some of the biggest problems or challenges that you see in our current transportation system?
Well, look, people want to push a button and get a ride. It's sort of this universal thing. I joke around, I say, if we found Martians on Mars, they too would push a button. They'd want to push a button and get a ride. And so the point is that in the hundreds of cities around the world, in the over 70 countries that we're in, there's this fundamental need to make transportation better, to make getting around cities better. And so we see that here just like everywhere else. There's certain nuances when it comes to how government and business work together, how we partner on sort of the way forward when it comes to regulation, the rules that are put in place. But we haven't had a lot of friction here in China, and so maybe the most unique thing we've seen is how welcoming the cities here have been to our kind of technology and our kind of innovation. And it doesn't take, you don't have to go and look at, do too many searches on Google News or on Baidu or what have you to find that we have resistance in a lot of places, but you won't generally see that here in China.
You did mention that because China has been one of the most welcoming countries in terms of these kind of actually disruptive technology, which is could be very disruptive to many of the traditional businesses.
Yeah, well, look, the way we think about doing business here in China is that progress must be in harmony with stability. But as long as those two things are happening together, we found that society, citizens, cities, et cetera, have been very, very open to innovation and to progress.
Yeah, but then I was reading the news. Yellow Cab in Chicago, they went bankrupt last year, and Yellow Cab in San Francisco, so they went down earlier this year. Do you think that further down the road, we're going to see more and more resistance, even in China, just because you are just too disruptive to some of the traditional businesses? Well,
it's kind of funny, right? Like, I don't know how much you're familiar with the restaurant business, for instance, but obviously when we're in cities, we know a lot about restaurants, but what I found out is that the average restaurant goes out of business, after 3 years. What's happened in the taxi industry, which is really interesting, is that people have gotten somehow used to the fact that they should not compete. That somehow or another, competition is fine in all areas of our economy except when it comes to taxis. And the problem is then that's resulted in really poor service. That's resulted in low wages, low income for drivers, and very difficult for people to get around. And so when you compete, let the service that's providing the best service flourish. And those services that are not doing well sort of go to the side. And it's the same with a restaurant that's serving bad food. Yes, and that shouldn't be controversial. Like, that's okay. That's the way the world works.
That sounds reasonable. But speaking of the competitive landscape, we talked about this in person last time in BOA, but then I think I would like to share it to the room here, is that you said that you actually learned the subsidy model coming into China.
Yes.
So before coming to China, or you call it incentive. Yeah. So this is something new that you actually pick it up here, but it doesn't look like something sustainable.
Well, look, I think we invest a lot of money here in China to grow our business, and we have a competitor who's investing even more. And so, look, at the end of the day, if we serve the customer better, if we serve riders and drivers better, if we serve the customer better, we'll get most of the customers. But we still have to keep up with a competitor who is investing deeply to grow fast. And it is a uniquely Chinese thing to invest as deeply as companies invest here before they get to profitability. But that's part of becoming a Chinese company. Like, we could run a very small, profitable business here in China, but in order to serve the entire population here, you really have to be ready to invest. And I think Uber has shown that we are, and that we're here for the long run.
So it's a never-ending competition.
Well, look, again, it's just we want to serve the customers best. We do everything we can to do that, but we have to go to a lot of cities. We have to speak to as many drivers and obviously get as many riders on the system as possible. The kinds of subsidies we see in China, they will not last forever. They can't. But there is just such a huge opportunity that anybody who's in our space here in China is going to need to invest deeply in order to serve the people.
So speaking of that competitor you were talking about, now it's actually backed by a much deeper pocket, namely Apple. So how is that going to change this entire competitive landscape or your strategy in China?
Well, look, when you're out there raising billions of dollars, there's only so many people that have billions of dollars to invest, right? So the list of folks who can invest gets smaller and smaller, but the kinds of checks you can get bigger and bigger. So look, we have partners here in China as well as outside in China, like Guangzhou Automotive, Baidu, Hainan Airlines. Outside of China, we obviously have huge partners like Google and a number of others. It's important to have those partnerships. It's important to find folks who want to invest in this kind of sector. Apple obviously has a big business here in China and want to make a statement investing in a local Chinese company.
What do you make of that deal? Do you think that's a good deal, or do you think it's actually better to invest in Uber China instead of Didi?
Well, look, I'm biased on this. So I think you probably know what my answer would be to that.
Okay, yeah. So we talk about this, you're a problem solver. So what is the biggest problem that you're solving right now?
Well, look, I think one of the there's a couple really interesting problems, but when we, imagine you're on one of the skyscrapers here in Tianjin, and you're looking and you see all these cars, we say, well, shouldn't all those cars be coordinated on some kind of ride-sharing network? Wouldn't the city be much more efficient if that were happening? And then you sort of zoom in on those cars and you go, wait a second, a ton of those cars only have one person in them. And so figuring out how to get more people in fewer cars is really what we're all about, right? So think of the world where there is no ride sharing and people are driving themselves to work, let's just say. You now have 30 people being served by 30 cars. Those 30 cars are only served 4% of the day. 96% of the day, they're stored somewhere, right? That takes up 20 to 30% of our land is just storing these hunks of metal that we drive around for 4% of the day. And so you go, well, we could do better. So Uber rolls out, and then, well, it's one car serving 30 people instead of 30 cars. And then we do something like Uber Pool, where you push a button, car comes, you open the door, you get in, but there's somebody else already in the car because two people are taking the same trip at the same time. Now you're not just saving the land that's used to store cars. You're not just taking cars out of parking lots. You're now taking them off the road. You're taking two cars that would have two people and making two people in one car. And now what you're talking about is literally taking congestion off the road. You're talking about taking pollution out of the air, reducing drunk driving. Well, we do that. Of course, any ride-sharing service does that. But how you get those seats, figure out a way to coordinate so people get into the same car. People that are taking the same trip at the same time get into the same car is a very complex logistics problem. On the surface, it may not appear to be so, but it really is. And it's one of the more interesting things that we're working on.
Great. So do you drive your own car back at home in San Francisco?
My driver's license is expired.
So you think eventually, maybe in 5 or 10 years' time, people don't really need to own their actual personal cars?
Well, look, if there was a mobility service that's cheaper than owning a car, more reliable, and you get to sit in the back seat instead of being stressed out in the front seat, why would you own a car? You might own a car like maybe some people own a horse. They might take a ride on the weekends or something. I don't know those people, but I'm just saying. You know, I think that's where the world is going, is that people will not own cars. They'll have a service that takes them where they want to go when they want to go there. And that's what Uber is.
Yeah, I read about the news about Uber self-driving car in Pittsburgh. So you have a huge research center in Pittsburgh. Yeah. So tell us more about the self-driving car project.
So we have cars on the road in Pittsburgh. They are driving themselves. There is a safety driver behind the wheel, just in case, to make sure that things go well. So we're in the early to middle stages of the development of software that can drive cars.
How is that different from like Google or Tesla, probably, which is more hardware?
Well, look, I think Google's been working on this for 8 years. And there's a reason. 1 million people die every year in cars from human error. People making mistakes when they're driving. And there's tens of millions of people that get injured. And then think of the trillions of hours that we spend behind the wheel driving. And so there's a huge, huge positive impact to society when driverless cars become a thing. And it really, as a technology company, Uber had to say, well, look, are we going to resist the future or become part of it? Are we going to embrace it? And we really chose the latter. And so we're investing deeply in it, and we're racing to catch up to Google. And we feel pretty good so far, but there's still a lot of work to do.
How many countries are we currently in globally?
We are in over 70 countries. And it may be like 72 or 73. I'm not sure the exact number.
So do you see different user behaviors across different countries? And do you actually have products that's tailored to different cultures or different countries?
I mean, we definitely do, right? So, yeah, you're going to get a different experience in Delhi, India, than you'll get in Stockholm, Sweden.
Any stories to share?
Look, you can get a new car in India for $4,000, right? So that's going to be a different kind of experience. Now, it's a little tight in the back, okay? That's how the experience gets a little different. Yeah, I mean, the biggest differences that you're going to see across cities is going to be, based on the sort of, let's call it the per capita GDP, will determine in a lot of ways what the quality of the car is, how luxury the car can get. But also traffic is going to make a big difference in the experience. What's interesting is in our high traffic cities, we're able to get huge, huge match rates on Uber Pool. Because your ride, if it takes it 45 minutes to go 5 miles, then what happens is that you have a lot of time to get matched with somebody else who might be going along the same route. And so we're able to actually have a bigger impact on reducing traffic in the places that have the most traffic. And so there's some interesting things that you see there. And there's different products we rolled out where it's not just 2 people getting in the car, like where one gets picked up and the other gets picked up. We're starting to coordinate in a few cities where 5 people will push the button at the same time and then all walk to the same place where that car picks all of them up. And once you start to get to 4 or 5 people in a car at the same time, you can really, really have a huge impact on cities and how people move in those cities. So,
for example, the US and China, do you see any differences in terms of users' behavior?
Well, look, it's really, you're not going to see a difference in one country versus another. It's really about city by city. So, Shanghai, they're going to stay out later than they do in Chengdu, as an example. Is that fair?
Not necessarily, because we're pretty much like night person in Chengdu. If people are from, I think the local, mainland Chinese people know that because they go out to eat maybe 12, around midnight. So next time, maybe you should experience more of Chengdu's nightlife.
So sometimes, I'll look at the data and I'll report back. But my sense is that I might be right, but I'll verify before I argue with a native Chengdu citizen. No,
it's fair to say that I was just being too defensive.
Okay.
The pride.
I just know in Chengdu they're a little bit more laid back,
Yeah, so, it is definitely. It's fair.
But to say what it is it's not really about China versus U.S. or India versus Pakistan, it's not really this kind of thing. What it's really about is it's about different people live differently in different cities. Right? So like, for instance, in London, I don't know if there's a city on the planet that parties as late as they do in London, for instance. Or we see different times where rush hour happens. We see there are some times where lots of people live in a particular neighborhood and they're all in a particular industry and they all go along the same route. And so they carpool together a lot. Or sometimes you have cities that are very distributed, like Los Angeles. And so it's interesting to see how cities move. And when you see how cities move, you get a real good sense of what moves that city. You get a sense of what makes that city unique. And it's really not a country-by-country thing. It's really a city-by-city thing.
So we do see different functionalities in terms of the app that's tailored to different, maybe on the city basis.
Definitely.
Yeah, so I wonder, what is your day like? So 6 years into the business and just had this exponential growth.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, you mentioned it in the intro. I like to say my management style is problem solver in chief. And so what I do in a given day is I have a set of problems that need to be solved. And I start at the most important and work my way down. And for the problems I don't have time for, somebody else gets to solve them. Now, if somebody's already solving a problem, I don't need to get involved if the problem's getting solved. But you know, people go, wow, so your day's just full of problems. I'm like, yeah, I've got a lot of problems. But it's sort of like how a math professor thinks of problems, right? Is that, think of a great math professor who has no math problems to solve. He's a very sad math professor. And so that's very much how I look at it. Solving problems is every problem is an opportunity for innovating and being creative and finding something new. And that's what I love to do, and I do it every day. And so it can span to be lots of things. I'm an engineer by training. I spend a lot of time with our scientists who are doing very sophisticated logistics work and pricing work. I spend a lot of time with a team of folks who is working to make sure that drivers, that we're sort of serving drivers as customers, not just the riders. And so there's a lot of product work in that. Obviously, we have operations around the world. They have to be run efficiently. And so I spend a lot of time with the operations teams. But it really goes across the board. And because of the nature of the company that Uber is, it uniquely needs the problem solving sort of spans across many different dimensions at the same time, which for me makes it fun.
Yeah, we're not going to be going through the story about how you started up Uber. For those who don't know, you can just Google that online. There's plenty of stories online. So you basically, as a serial entrepreneur, you went through lots of ups and downs. Those are amazing stories. You can just simply Google or Baidu those stories. But then, so 6 years have passed. Do you think anything changed about the mentality from the trough maybe to now maybe the peak?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think as an entrepreneur, I've seen what people would think of as good times. I've seen a fair amount of bad times. But as an entrepreneur, they all feel the same. They feel very similar because if you get to a place where it's easy as an entrepreneur, it's about to get really, really hard. And so what you find is with really good entrepreneurs, they're constantly making things difficult for themselves. And it's pushing, I like to say, you push until it hurts. Or you want to be always pushing beyond what you're comfortable with. And you're sweating just a little bit all the time. And when that happens, when you're constantly pushing beyond what you think, what you know is possible, you're always sweating a little bit, and you're always a little bit nervous. But that is the drug of being an entrepreneur. And so when you're pushing like that, and you're never really relaxed, then it always feels small. And so in many ways, it feels to me the same now as it did at the beginning. Still a little nervous.
Were you ever fully aware of this notion of the sharing economy when you first started the company, or it actually came afterwards?
Well, I'm not sure who invented the term, but it didn't exist when we started Uber. You know, look, I haven't yet been able to pin down what exactly it is. And so I think I've tried to come up with some terms that maybe describe it a little better for myself. You know, I used to think of it as maybe like the on-demand economy, right? So somebody's pushing a button and a car appears in 5 minutes. But there's the other side of the on-demand economy, which is a driver can push a button and get to work. And so really the way I'm thinking about it is an entrepreneur economy. And I think that sort of, it dovetails, I think, well with some of Premier Lee's comments, which is people can, you know, when supply side reform happens, people can really start to engage in the economy themselves. They can be entrepreneurs. And it's, you know, entrepreneurs that are building tech companies, but also entrepreneurs that are working on a platform and easily starting their own transportation business, where they're their own boss. They can work when they want to, and they can not work when they want to. They can put more cars on the system if they want and start hiring employees if that's what they want to do. And in fact, we have a number of people doing just exactly that. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity as these sort of digital platforms are built out, you know, whether it be Airbnb, Uber, you know, there's a number, of course, that are native here to China, where people can now get to work on their own terms. And so in many ways, I look at what folks call the sharing economy, I look at it as the entrepreneur economy. And it's what I think is going to power sort of the next era of Chinese growth.
For Uber's future, one short-term question and one long-term question. So in the short term, are we going to see any new products come in, especially for China, like maybe, I don't know, Uber Eats, that now exists in the US, but then not in China yet. So any new products that's come in?
Well, I mean, Uber Eats is there will be a number of them. And if we're lucky enough, maybe even driverless cars. But the Uber Eats is a really interesting thing. It's the old way of getting food is, you know, you call for food, and then the restaurant makes it. Then they put it out for delivery. A delivery guy gets the food, and then he's in his car, and he delivers like 10 orders. In the Uber world, you don't order your food. The food is made. It's put out for delivery. It's in a car, and then you push a button and order your food, and it's 5 minutes away.
What if nobody orders?
Well, we have to predict what people are going to order. And so we twist.
Or the driver gets to eat two dinners.
That's funny. We twist the supply chain around so that the food is the same age when you get it, but you got it 5 minutes from when you wanted it. And those are the types of things we do. We love doing these kinds of things because we think of our business as we're really good at delivering cars in 5 minutes. But once you can deliver a car in 5 minutes, there's a lot of things you can deliver in 5 minutes. And so we sort of have fun with that. But we haven't rolled that out in China just yet because I have sort of a golden rule of China, which is I'm only going to lose money in one business at a time. So maybe when we start getting profitable in the business we're in, then we can start rolling out others.
Yeah, just to add on to that question, because we talked about the subsidy earlier on, and then you said that you learned this model come into China. Do you think there's something, I wouldn't say wrong, but then something going on with the current business environment in China, which is probably not that healthy? Like this kind of competitive landscape. We don't have it anywhere else in other markets.
I mean, nothing as extreme as here, but I don't think of it as unhealthy. I think of it as losing sleep. I guess that is unhealthy. Okay, all right. So it's competitive because the stakes are so high, right? There's huge amount of investment because the opportunity is so big. And that is reality, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'd like the extra half hour of sleep a night. Like, that would be great for me. But if I got that extra half hour and we didn't have such fierce competition, we'd be serving riders and drivers not as well, right? And people think of this investment and you know, how much we spend here in China, but I take some amount of pride that at the end of the day, all of that investment, of course, is serving riders and drivers in cities. And ultimately, all of that money goes into drivers' pockets. That's the place where all this money goes, ultimately. And I mean, if it's going to go somewhere, that seems like a pretty good place. So
my last question is, what's Uber going to be like in 10 years? Have you ever envisioned?
I have no idea. I get that question a lot. And remember, we're 6 years old. And 6 years ago, who would have guessed what's going on now? So I don't try to presume to know what's going to be like in 10 years. A lot of times when people ask me this question, I say being at Uber is like driving a car. And you're driving pretty fast, and it's foggy. And so you have to hold on to that steering wheel a little bit tighter. You've got a bead of sweat coming down, and you're really paying attention to the road. You do not have enough time to look back and see where you've been, and you can only see so far ahead. But if you like the ride, if you like the journey, then that's all that matters. And I think we're going to go to amazing places, but we are really enjoying the ride so far.
I love that metaphor. Thanks a lot for this tremendous conversation.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks.